think that thanks, Jillian. And I didn't let Jillian introduce herself.
Jillian Saul, RRBC staff.
Thanks, Jillian. And Brian, you just joined us. Would you introduce yourself? Brian Johnson, yeah. Go ahead.
Yes, sir. This is Brian Johnson with Virginia Farm Bureau.
Thank you, Brian.
Brian.
Okay, starting with the views of the conservation organizations, a presentation from almost a year ago now, June 15th. So we all recognize it's a little bit dated, and I'd already gotten a comment about the Caroline County ordinance, which was highlighted in some of the presentations that day, has subsequently been repealed, and we will note that in a footnote. But I think we have to be true to the presentations based on the time in which they were given, and then just note any changes going forward. Okay, I'm going to stop talking and open it up for comments, reactions, observations, whatever you want to add to those sections. Okay. Are there any conclusions that we want to highlight in that final chapter that are based on what we see in what was presented to us by the Nature Conservancy, the Bay Foundation, PEC, and friends?
Eldon, this is Deirdre. I'd like to make a comment with regard to Professor Daniel's description of treatment of soils. He mentions saving, reapplying topsoil. I think that's kind of a simplistic approach to what would actually be involved if you were to restore the land to its prior use. Might be a little misleading, although he does go on and quote, emphasizes the need to be transparent and inform the public that sites face long-term impacts. But I thought the suggestion that essentially stockpiling topsoil and then subsequently at the end of 30 to 40 years, reapplying it, it's not topsoil anymore. So, you know, you might want to cut to the chase and acknowledge that fact. I think most farmers would agree that that is the case. But I think that statement is a little misleading, although, like I said, he does kind of back out of it a little bit. Just a comment from the ag side.
Okay, I will note that, and Dr. Daniel wrote to me a couple of days ago and said it'll be probably the end of the month before he gives me any comments back on that summary of his session. So he may address that, but so noted, Deirdre, and I thank you for that.
Okay, thank you.
Eldon, I just wanted to chime in with what Deirdre said, because I mean, a long time ago, I worked on Mineland reclamation project in Pennsylvania, strangely enough. And it is possible. It's just very involved. And as Deirdre said, you don't want people to assume that just applying topsoil is going to handle it. It's never exactly going to be what it was. So a footnote would be really helpful. Otherwise, I thought that summary was pretty accurate and balanced.
Okay, thank you. Mike, you got your hand up.
Yeah, I want to acknowledge what Deidre's saying and agree with what she's saying and share with folks what we have observed as best practice on the matter, which is obviously through the construction phase, being very sensitive to the integrity of the topsoil. And if you have to do any cut fill, which in this region, the cut fill would primarily be focused on the erosion sediment control basins, and there should not be significant cut fill within the array area because of the natural topography. But if there is any cut fill, you have to segregate and stockpile the topsoil and then redistribute it immediately after the cut fill is done. And then ensure that through the life of the project that the soil quality is something that's monitored and supplemented through the life. You can do things to decompact on the front end, and then you can add things like earthworms to help natural decompaction. But on a project that we're working on in Fauquier County, how we've approached this is to insert for the conversation a commitment that we would make, which would be a permitting condition, where you would do soil samples prior to any construction activities to look at the soil in terms of all the objective criteria and attributes of it on the biological, physical, and chemical side, and establish baseline. And then through the life of the project in the operation phase, continue to monitor it, and then have the decommissioning obligation be that the topsoil quality has to be as good or better than the baseline in terms of the objective attributes, which would then support crop yields post decommissioning. So definitely want to flag for folks that this is sort of the bleeding edge of best practice, and it's something that we're making commitments on in the localities that we're working on projects that are going through permitting right now. And the more that the folks who have knowledge on this can work together to recognize that topsoil is a strategic resource that we should be sensitive in the dealings of. I think an ounce of prevention is worth a pound of cure, or, throughout the process of the life of the project, deep-rooted vegetation, all of the supplementation rather than waiting to the end to look at the soil quality. I don't know, Deidre, if you have thoughts in response to that.
Yeah, I would agree with your analysis of what is needed following any disturbance of the site, especially if there is the, generally speaking, within the contract, there's the assumption that it would be a 30-year hiatus before the land is, quote, returned to its previous use. So yeah, I would agree with your comments.
And Mike, I got a question for you on that, but before I do, I wanted to acknowledge that Adam from Fauquier County has joined us. Adam, would you introduce yourself?
Good morning, Adam Schellenberger from Fauquier County Planning.
Okay, thank you, Adam. Since Mike had just referenced a project he was working on in Fauquier right as you were coming on, I wanted to acknowledge you joined us. My question is that something that you're working into the host agreements?
We would propose it as one of the binding conditions in a special exception permit or a conditional use permit. If you think about the process, generally an applicant will submit an application which makes commitments, staff will review it, and then a staff report and recommendation will come out where there will be a fairly extensive list of conditions. It would either sit in the siting agreement or within the conditions that would be part of staff's recommendation. And we often will, through the process of community engagement, meeting folks with Deidre and PEC and others, workshop those draft conditions and then collaborate with staff on it in advance of the more formal discussion at the Planning Commission and Board of Supervisors.
Okay, thank you.
But that's how it gets bound and codified, that it's a binding commitment, and that if the applicant doesn't fulfill the commitment, then the locality, being the authority having jurisdictions, can pull the permit and prevent operation of the project, which obviously the project owner is sensitive to compliance with the conditions to be able to generate revenue to repay the capital investment.
Okay, thank you. We jumped from the comments or the presentations by the conservation organizations, NGOs, right into Dr. Daniels' presentation, which is fitting because that probably generated more discussion than any other presentation we had over the past year. And a couple people have joined late, and don't mean to call you out, but just any comments on the conservation organizations sections before we move on. Okay, if something comes to mind later, please weigh in. I'm gonna, anything else on Dr. Daniels' presentation? Okay, and as I noted before, I'm expecting I'll still get some comments from him, and I'll incorporate those as well. Next is Energy Right, or Energy Right Virginia. Any comments, observations, conclusions on that one? All right, I'm gonna.
Eldon, I do have a quick question.
Sure.
Is there a reason why on the conservation easements one, there's a more detailed description of the discussion that happened amongst the members versus how in some of these other subsequent sessions we do not go into a more detailed overview of the discussion that happened after the presentation?
Yeah. Simply didn't feel that there was anything significant added that hadn't already been picked up. It was a spacing thing, but if you feel like there was something that should be called out, please say so.
Oh, I don't think there was. I was just wondering why. It was just yeah.
You know, some of the discussion just reinforced some things that were already said, provided examples, those types of things, asked questions and clarified. And so it's just for the sake of space and time. But good question. Okay, moving on. This brings us to Mike's presentation, Open Roads Renewable. Any comments? Mike, I take it you're comfortable with the summary of what you presented that we put together here?
Yes, sir. Yeah, two things to call to folks' attention, maybe three.
Okay.
The first thing is that there is a very real limitation on the transmission system of injection without costly upgrades. So when you think about solar sprawl and the concern of, you know, what precedent's being established, there's always a natural limitation on the size of the pipe, if you will, and the amount of water flowing through it. As an analogy, it's called the MVA rating of the transmission elements. But if siting results in a project that is great from a land use perspective, but it doesn't fit on the grid, then it'd be economically inviable. Conversely, the real challenge is finding that needle in the haystack where it fits from a land use perspective, it fits from an ecological perspective, you've got the right permit conditions, and it actually fits on the grid. Generally, developers will spend time evaluating the grid and then using that criteria for siting. And it's once you're through the PJM study process or have confidence on where things are going to settle that you would then initiate permitting and the discussion, because you don't want to spin people up before you have that. So that's one item. The second item is sort of part and parcel to that, is we believe that projects should really be evaluated on a case-by-case basis and recognize that these projects are moldable in a sense in terms of setting back from sensitive areas, looking at things that can be done with the wetlands for beneficial downstream impacts, the type of fence that's used, the type of screening. It's really this conversation that usually takes 6, 9, 12 months between local community members, staff, key constituents, planning commission, and board, where I would encourage everybody to lean in and look at things on a case-by-case basis, because I would argue that, you know, the more sophisticated or responsible developers, folks that are showing up here, really do want to work through the issues that come up, and most of the substantive technical items can be addressed. The third and final thing is actually a new aha observation for us, and I would be very interested in getting Brian's off the cuff reactions to this. And it's something that we're looking at in detail on the project that's being proposed in Fauquier County. And it looks at the current economic productivity of row crops on the, call it 450 acres of land that'd be within the fence for the proposed solar project versus the agricultural productivity or the economic impact of rotational sheep grazing. And our initial investigation, which we're probably going to keep digging into and present formally, is that the local economic impact to the agricultural community is actually greater with on-site solar plus sheep than the economic output of row crops. And the comparison is on 450 acres, the wages that would be paid directly or earned either for a tenant farmer or somebody that owns the land is probably in the $20,000 per year range. And then the input economics in terms of seed and fertilizer and the local tractor supply, et cetera, and the output versus the wages to an on-site sheep grazer, assuming the sheep grazer is a local community member, the veterinarian, local benefits, et cetera. Our initial investigation, which we hope to do more work on and present, is that it's actually surprisingly such that the economic impact to the local ag economy is greater with rotational sheep grazing under a utility scale solar project than with row crops, driven in large part because of the wages that would be paid to the on-site grazer, which are going to be 4, 5, 6 times what the wages would be for the row crops. Obviously, when we think about ag land preservation and land use, it's not all about the economic impact. There are other, very real reasons why ag land conservation is something that is in the public interest, or however you want to phrase it. But this is all new investigation that we're leaning into in response to a comp plans compliance review and, maybe a not fully understood view that the ag economy impact of rotational sheep grazing under the panels likely has more economic benefit to the local community than row crops.
Brian, you got a reaction to that?
Yeah, I mean, I would, I don't know if that study or some of that information is available, but I'd certainly be glad to kind of take a look at it and kind of give you Farm Bureau's perspective on that. I know I've been in some other meetings where that discussion has occurred, but I don't think I've actually seen any data or seen any studies as of yet, but we'll be glad to work with you to work through that.
That'd be great. Yeah, I mean, we're digging in as deep as we can go. We're working with a gentleman named Eric Bronson from James River Grazing, who runs, I believe, like 1,500 US sheep across 5 or 6 projects in the Commonwealth right now. And the intention on the project in Fauquier County is to partner both with him and a local Farm Bureau member in Fauquier County who would do the on-site grazing, and all those details we're pulling together for the discussion. And it would be great, Brian, to have you in the loop. We'll probably work with Tim Mize up in Fauquier County on a review of it as well. I don't know if you know Tim or not.
Okay. Yeah, familiar with Tim, but yeah, I'll kind of maybe follow up with you on that, and maybe we can have some comments or report back at the next meeting of this group.
That'd be great. I'll pop you a note. Thank you.
Thank you.
Other reactions to what Mike was just presenting?
Hey, this is Aaron. Really quickly, I'll just share a couple things that I've seen just from other projects around the state. I actually saw a project last night. I think it was in Dinwiddie County. I was watching the public hearing. Not to discount like row cropping or other forms of agriculture, but I've also seen instances where developers are essentially like replacing impacted cropland, sometimes in like a 1-to-1 or a 1 to 1.5. So if like there's impacts to cropland, perhaps, there's only a certain percentage of the total project area under panel. And they're agreeing to, replace some cropland impacted with the creation of the same, if not more, cropland somewhere else. So that's maybe another alternative. Do see a fair amount of sheep grazing, but in instances where perhaps row cropping is of more value, either to the character of the county or what have you, I've also seen that as an opportunity for developers to work with the Farm Bureau and agricultural community as well.
Thank you, Aaron. Tommy?
Yes, I'd like to ask Mike, would you be willing to identify the projects in Fauquier that you're looking at?
Yeah, sure. It's called Alameda Solar. It is located in the south end of the county that's proposing to interconnect to the overhead Dominion transmission line. We have submitted an application for the Comar 2232 review. It was denied 4-1 at the Planning Commission on April 20th. There will be a work session on June 8th at the Board of Supervisors, and the board will take up our appeal of the 2232 denial on July 13th.
Thanks. Yeah, I read the article from the April meeting. I just wanted to verify that. Thank you very much.
Yep, and we hope to share at June 8th the economic impact of row crops versus rotational sheep as part of the discussion with the Board of Supervisors. It looks like, I don't know if Adam's still on the line, if he has anything else to add, but that's as best as I can represent on a process perspective.
I don't have anything to add. I can share the link to the application materials in the chat if everybody would like to review it.
That'd be helpful. Thank you, Adam. Okay, most people on here should know what a 2232 review is, and I'm just going to not assume everybody does. If anybody doesn't, we can explain that. Okay, I assume everybody knows what that's basically. It's conformance with the comp plan determination.
And what's unique about Fauquier County is that's a gating item to get to the special exception process. So we're going through that process, and if we're fortunate in the appeal, we would then go on to the special exception process. But I don't believe that any solar projects in Fauquier County have made it through the comp plan conformance review, despite solar being a permitted use via special exception on rural agricultural land.
Thank you for that, Mike. Anything else to add on the solar developers section? Okay, with that, Amelia, we're now moving to the Dominion section. The summary there. Any comments on our very brief summary of Brian Stuber's presentation, Amelia?
No, I don't have any comments. Thank you.
Okay. All right. Thank you. I appreciate that, because that means that Jillian and I got the summary right. What was said, and we appreciate that acknowledgement. Any comments on Dominion's presentation, observations that we want to note? Okay. The window is always open for the next few weeks on any observations that come to mind. Next is the Old Dominion Electric Cooperative presentations. Any comments or observations on that? Okay. That takes us through all the write-ups that had been distributed. What I'd like to ask now is, are there any general comments that anybody feels they need to add before we talk about going forward?
Just that, a little like Lee Daniels, I'm taking my sweet time getting to some revisions for the PDC section as well, but it's an open tab. It's on my mind
Okay, thank you, Luke. We will receive comments from presenters in revising any summary we did of their work all the way through. So, you know, there's no cutoff date for that except for when we got to make a presentation to the commission. Because I want to represent fairly in our, you know, document that will outlive us what people said. Okay. Next month, we'll talk about the local revenue section. And Tommy, I apologize that yours was the last up, but that's just the way it worked on this end, us trying to get all the pieces together. And then I'd like to spend time next time on discussion of conclusions and recommendations, policy best practices identified. We've noted stuff as we've gone through the March, April, and today's meeting. We're going to have those meetings summarized and back out to you so that we can have that discussion. What I hope to do, if we don't get bogged down in trying to do it, is synthesize this meeting and the two previous ones to cull out what things that would go in that section about either conclusions, findings, recommendations, or I think most importantly, policy best practices, and put them out to you for you to react to. You know, I may miss something in my interpretation of our discussions of the last few meetings. So I really encourage folks to put their eye on it. And if there's something we say that you just no, that's not right, we want to hear that back because we want to try to get this as right as we can. Or if there's something we just plain missed that needs to be identified. I would like to note, you know, also ongoing changes, and I'll use as an example Mike's discussion of the economics of agricultural use. You know, that's emerging, and I think it's be important for us to identify for the commission, for the elected officials, what are emerging techniques, practices, ongoing research, so that they know that it's out there as they start, as they may face a question of a project being put before them. Comments, thoughts, direction to Jillian and me as we hone in on the end of this.
Eldon, who all is actually writing this? Just you and Jillian?
Yeah. And you guys are all the sounding board and the editors.
Okay.
I was just looking to see if there were anything in the comments. This is meant to be somewhat iterative and opportunity for everybody to react, so that when we present in June to the commission, it is something meaningful to them. And I think you know, the chairman challenged us back in the March meeting that we have a written document, that we also have some kind of a one-pager that's a little more visual. And I think it would really be focused mostly on that last section. So I'm looking for any input there. Graphics page is not my strong suit. I'll be looking to Jillian to help me with some of that. She has some experience with that. And you know, anything anybody wants to put forward as an idea of presentation, we can talk about it between now and the next meeting. We'll talk about it at the next meeting, because we'll have, after that meeting, we'll have a week to turn everything around for the commission meeting.
Yeah, I'll definitely spend some time on it, and I'll ship it around to the Berkeley crew too. I was hoping to actually have our Solar Pro come to the meeting this morning, but she is swamped with 3 solar applications today. So
Solar Pro, I like that. Okay, I appreciate that, Luke. Yeah, I'm just relying on everybody here to help us get this thing across the finish line by being not being shy about criticism or suggestions to us. We've kind of been, Jillian and I have been the hub of the wheel, but we do not qualify as experts. I know a lot more now than I did a year ago, I'll say that, but anyway. Okay, anything else for the good of the cause, and we can release everybody a little early? I don't expect next month's meeting to be this short. I hope the discussion on recommendations and best practices is very robust. Looking forward to that, and we'll try to arm you with stuff to react to. Okay. Thank you, everybody. Good. And I'm going to say what I've said in the emails. Really appreciate the time that everybody's put into this. It's been invaluable for us to try to bring all these pieces together so that we hopefully have a useful document for elected officials as they're dealing with future projects.
Right back at you. Conversation is so important when there's new things to unpack, and the more that we can rely on each other to get to the truth for good decision making, the better for citizens' interests things will be. That's my view. So thank you, Eldon, for convening this.
Thank you, Mike. I appreciate that. I will say this, listening to your, this is a little off the point, but listening to your discussion on the sheep, it reminded me of my trip to Ireland a year ago, where they're just sheep all over the place. And of course, they're painted different colors so that the farmers know which ones are their sheep. And so you gave me mental pictures of the green fields of Ireland. So thank you. Thanks, everybody.
thank you, Ellen.